Hey everyone, today I want to talk about 3 ideas I took from the article that I read. The first idea that I want to talk about is the rights of the learner and creating a democratic classroom. The second idea is building a community inside the classroom, and the third idea is co-creating classroom norms. So starting off with the first idea, the rights of the learner and creating a democratic classroom. So this was the main idea that I learned from the article. And another way to say the rights of the learner is ROTL. And essentially what this means is the basic rights that students have inside the classroom, such as being confused, making mistakes without judgment, the right to be heard, and the right to share unfinished ideas. And what really stood out to me is how these rights shift the traditional power dynamic between teachers and students. So instead of the teacher being the only one in control, the ROTL creates a democratic classroom where learning is shared. Students feel safe to take risk and speak up because they know that confusion and mistakes is part of the learning process. Whether they are inside of the classroom or outside the classroom, these students are going to carry these social skills with them when they go into adulthood. So they need to learn at this age that it is okay to make mistakes and to learn from those mistakes because these mistakes build their character. And it's something that these students should never be ashamed of. So in the article, it gave a great example through a 6th grade teacher, Ms. Picasso. During one of the lessons, a student named Lucy reminded the teacher that her classmate had the right to be confused. And instead of the teacher being upset at the student, the teacher thanked Lucy for speaking up and used that moment to reinforce that confusion is natural and valuable information and feedback for the teacher. That simple interaction shows what a democratic classroom should look like in action. Students are empowered to advocate for themselves and for one another. And it made me realize that when we give students the real ownership of their learning, they become more engaged, more confident, and more responsible members of the classroom community. So the second idea I took from the article is building community in care inside the classroom. And I want to dive a little deeper into that. So the author describes community as being more than just being in the same classroom. It's about having trust, empathy, and a shared responsibility amongst all the teachers and the students. So there was a really important distinction I want to talk about in that article about what it means to care for a student and care about a student. So caring about a student means that you have empathy towards them, but caring for a student means that you take action and you do something about that student. And when you take action and when you care for a student, you are doing something that supports their growth and their well-being. And that really resonated with me because it shows that teaching isn't just about delivering lessons. It's about creating a supportive environment where every student feels valued. And that's super important. So an example of that in the article talks about Ms. Picasso's classroom and how care shows up in small but really powerful ways. She helps students normalize being confused, and she celebrates mistakes as opportunities for growth. This builds what the article calls collective care, where students also look for one another and they help their peers, they show empathy, and they collaborate without judgment. This idea made me rethink how I view my own role as a teacher, and it reminds me that relationships and emotional safety come before any rigorous learning before anything else. The students' health and the students' skills to be a better person is always going to be more important than having the material that is taught to them. So when students feel cared for and when they make those connections with their peers and their teachers, they are much more willing to take risks, ask questions, and truly engage in the learning process. Instead of a student who does not have a connection with their peers and their teachers, they might feel shy, they might feel, embarrassed or ashamed to ask questions. And you always want to make sure that your students feel safe and they feel comfortable enough to come to you and ask you questions. So the third and final idea I took from the video is co-creating classroom norms inside the classroom. In the article, it talks about how instead of teachers coming in with a list of classroom rules, the process begins with students reflecting on questions like, what helps you learn in a group? What makes it hard to learn? And what rights do we need so that everyone can be successful? Through those discussions, students identify what's important to them, and it helps me as a teacher write down their own rights and responsibilities of the learner. An example that was given in the article is Ms. Picasso, and she turns these discussions into a collaborative project. Her students write ideas on Post-it notes. They discuss them as a class, and then they create a poster that stays up all year as a living document. And students refer back to it often, even reminding the teacher about their rights when necessary. And what I love about this approach is that it gives students real ownership of their classroom culture. It's not just the teacher says and does, and the teachers have to abide by those rules and procedures. The students feel valued and they feel important because their feedback wasn't just about listening, but they are heard, and then you do something about it. The teacher does something about it, and in this process, the teacher, Ms. Picasso, lets them work together, collaborate, and then she puts it on a board inside the classroom all year round for all the teachers and the students to see. And it reminds both the students and the teachers how important it is to have, a classroom environment where everyone feels safe and included and valued. So with that being said, this idea reminded me that when students help build the environment that they learn in, they take pride in it and they care for it more deeply. So 2 ideas that I want to implement inside the classroom is co-creating the right of the learner with my students. And the second one, fostering a classroom culture of care and collective responsibility. So starting off, let's talk about the first one that I want to implement. I want to implement the co-creating the right of the learner with my students, just like Ms. Picasso did in the article. So instead of on day one, me simply coming in and telling the students, look, here's the rules, here's the procedures, this is what we're going to do, this is not what we're going to do. I want to start off by having classroom discussions on day one. Questions like, what helps you learn best? What makes it hard for you to learn? And then together, me and the students collaborate, and we create this rights and responsibilities of the learners poster that we would put up all year round inside the classroom. That way, students and teachers can refer back to it when needed. And the reason why I love this idea is because it gives students ownership and a sense of voice right from day one. It helps build a more positive classroom environment. It helps build more connections with their peers and the teacher. And it helps also, from day one, set clear expectations for everybody. So I can already imagine using this in like my social studies classroom. For example, when a student feels stuck, they could always refer back to the poster and say, I have the right to be confused, or I have the right to ask for help. And it turns the classroom into a community of learners rather than just a place where they fear their mistakes and they're too scared to ask for help. So implementing this idea would help me create a more democratic classroom and a trusting environment where students feel empowered to take ownership of both their learning and their behavior. So the second idea that I want to implement in my classroom is fostering a classroom culture of care and collective responsibility. In the article, it explains that care isn't just about being kind or sympathetic. It's about taking action, caring for and caring about. It's about taking the action of students and their well-being and growth. And I want to be intentional when showing care for my students, not just caring about my students. This means noticing when they're struggling, celebrating their progress, and creating time for reflection and connection. But what really stood out to me was the idea of collective care. Students also caring about one another. And I want to teach my students that we all share responsibility for making the classroom a safe and supportive place to learn. For example, we could do quick weekly reflections like, how did we show care for one another this week? Or who helps you feel supported in learning? And in group work, I could model and praise behaviors like listening respectfully, making eye contact, encouraging peers, and recognizing each other's strengths. And over time, I hope that this can help my students understand that learning is not just an individual race. It's something that we do together. So implementing this culture of care will help my students feel seen, supported, and confident enough to take risk, not just in social studies, but any learning environment. So after reading the article, one adjustment that I want to make in my teaching is intentionally centering community and care in my lesson plan, especially in how I structure group work and classroom discussions. So in the past, I've always planned my lesson plans based on the standard and the content that the students need to know and need to learn about and master. Well, going forward, what I want to implement in my lesson plan is how students interact with each other so they can grow those social skills, so they can create a safer environment for each other and for the teacher, and the teacher vice versa. This article really made me rethink this approach. It reminded me that learning doesn't always happen in isolation, if ever. Students learn best when they feel safe, when they feel heard and seen and valued. It creates a more positive environment for everyone. So one change I want to make is designing my lesson plans both academically, yes, and have a community goal. For example, when I'm planning a lesson plan, I not only want to include a social studies objective, but I want to include an intentional community or care objective, such as having a question like students will practice listening respectfully to peers, or students will use positive language when responding to mistakes. This article talked about Miss Picasso and her class, and it really stuck out to me when Lucy reminded the teacher that her classmate had the right to be confused. It showed how powerful it can be when students feel comfortable advocating for themselves and others. This is the type of moment that doesn't happen by accident. It happens because this teacher created an environment of trust and mutual respect. So to bring this into my own classroom, I want to plan on building reflection time after group activities. I'll ask students to talk about what went well in their collaboration, how they showed care for their peers, and how they can improve as community learners. And these small changes to lesson planning can make a big difference in how students interact with each other and take ownership of their learning. Because I believe that this adjustment would benefit all my students, not just one class period, not just one single student, every single student, no matter their academic level, because it deserves to feel like a valued part of my classroom community. By making it a care environment and students collaborating, I can help my quieter students feel more confident sharing ideas and help my stronger students learn the importance of empathy and patience. Overall, this article made me rethink my whole lesson plan, more than just organizing academic tasks. It's about creating a meaningful experience that builds connections and trust and responsibility. By centering community and care, I can design lessons that help students grow, not only as learners, but people that are going to be thoughtful and kind and are able to collaborate well with other people. And that's a change that I'm really excited to make.